Welcome to the Foul Play YouTube channel.
Hey, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, and welcome. Welcome to Coffee with Foul Play. My name is Dr. Silkman, and today we have a special presentation, and it's entitled The Intimate Sample. Welcome, beautiful people. And first of all, I'd like to thank all of our supporters and our subscribers. If you like what we do, please give us a thumbs up, leave your comments, and let us know how we're doing. All right, now at the moment, our Foul Play team, our server, we have 872 subscribers, which is absolutely awesome. And all of us on the panel, we thank you. We thank you for your support. We really do appreciate it. But guys, before we start the podcast proper, there's just a couple of things that I would like to address. First of all, I'd like to say that it is with regret that I have to inform the listeners that Christy, one of our Foul Play team, has left Foul Play, and she's going to be pursuing other endeavors, other forms of research. And we, all of us, and I'm sure we all are in agreement, we would like to thank Christy for her help and for her excellent research that she has done in the Foul Play team. As you know, Christy has spent a lot of time analysing the calls and has done a lot of really good work. Both Christy and I, we also had, I'm not sure whether it was pleasure or displeasure of reading Ken Kratz's book. So guys, I'm sure the panel is in agreement. We wish Christy the very best for her future endeavors and for her future research in the cases. Thank you very much, Christy. All right. Well, guys, joining us today on the panel, and we're going to keep it fairly casual today, is Bibi, Jack, K9 Kim, there's Lily, Neverly, Zoe, and Sammy. And guys, what will happen today is that both Sammy, Lily, and Zoe, and also Catnit, will be monitoring the chat on the YouTube channel. And so, guys, what we're going to do is we're going to present, I'm going to read through a series of slides. So I'll do that at the beginning. And fingers crossed, if everything works out really well, we're going to be playing a short clip. It runs for about 4 minutes, and the description of it is within the notes on YouTube. And once that is finished playing, then we'll open up the discussion to the panel and also to our audience. All right, guys. I just want to ask the panel, is there any other announcements or things that we need to discuss before we start the podcast? Guys, anything that we need to mention?
Maybe just a brief word about the crowdsourcing.
Yes, go for it,
Oh,
Jack.
yeah.
So as many people have probably know by now that are part of this universe, Eric Banana Man and Julia began a crowdsourcing effort to secure the transcripts and, if possible, the videos of the 2005 depositions, civil and civil suit, federal civil suit that Stephen had filed in 2004. There are well over a dozen of these, and we've only seen to date from, it's been 15 years. There's only clips of, I think, 3 or 4 of those that were yes. secured, that were secured by the post Crescent, and then but it's not very long. So we would like to get the full version and just see what happened and see the exchanges and what his lawyers were thinking at the time. So anyway, there's There are links at Foul Play. There are links on Twitter.
Awesome.
Yeah. So if anyone can give the smallest amount, everything helps. We're not that far from our complete goal. We have enough to get the transcripts now, and we're well on our way enough to get the videos. So anybody can
Oh,
give anything, it would be helpful. Thank you.
awesome. Thank you, Jack. Can you tell or remind the audience what's the total amount that needs to be raised in terms of the money?
Total amount, as I understand it, is just shy of $5,500, and we're at around $4,500, I think, right now. So we're really close.
Just to get the transcripts and the video.
That's right. And
Oh my Lord.
Yeah. Well, that's a far reduced price than what it was, because originally, when we began to pursue to get these in 2016, it was around $15,000.
Right. Oh my God. Well, thank you guys to everyone who's donated. That is superb. And let's hope we can get our hands on those transcripts and videos. Yeah, it'll be awesome. All right, guys. Guys, any other announcements? All right, we're all good to go. All right, thank you, guys. Well, look, welcome to the podcast. Like I said, this is a special podcast, and it's entitled The Intimate Sample. So if we can start with slide 1. Now, as you can see, the title of the slide is Teresa Hallback and the Intimate Sample. And this is a very important area of research to understand what happened, both from a defense point of view and also from a state point of view, and how it relates to the case. And it does involve forensic evidence, and it does involve discussing sensitive material. And of course, we must show the appropriate respect. So the big question that I want to ask in regards to this so-called intimate sample, first of all, what actually was the intimate sample? But the bigger question is, why did the defense team, why did Stephen Avery's defense team agree to a stipulation on this so-called intimate sample? And you'll see how this all played out. All right, guys. So if we go to slide 2, what I'm going to do is to give a background, a short description and background of what happened that fateful day. Now, as we all know, Teresa Hallback worked for Auto Traders, taking photographs of vehicles, and they publish the photographs in the Auto Trader magazine. And Stephen Avery had organised for Teresa Hallback to come out to the Avery salvage yard and take a photograph of his sister's van, as you can see right here. Now, Teresa Hallback had come to the Avery salvage yard on many different occasions, taking photographs, putting them in Auto Trader, and no problems whatsoever. However, on this fateful day, which was Halloween, Monday, October the 31st, 2005, allegedly Teresa Hallback was no longer seen. And one of the places, of course, that she had visited that day was the Avery salvage yard. And as we know, Stephen Avery stated that Teresa Hallback had come, taken photographs of the van, and he paid her. She gave him an Auto Trader magazine, and she left, right? According to Stephen, she had left the Avery salvage yard. Well, unfortunately, no one had seen Teresa Hallback afterwards. Allegedly, no one had seen her. No one had known where she had gone. There was no activity on her cell phone, as in Teresa Hallback hadn't used her cell phone after a specific time period, and she was listed as missing. So several days after that, her mother had rung up the sheriff's office and reported her daughter missing. And as you can see here on the right hand side of slide 2, her friends had made an endangered missing poster, basically highlighting specific important facts about Teresa and what she had been driving that day. All right, so if we go to slide 3, we know now, of course, and you can follow all of this in the podcast that we have done, we know that a private citizen by the name of Pam and Nicole Sturm, they went to the Avery Salvage Yard on November the 5th, which was a Saturday, and they discovered what appeared to be a blue Toyota RAV4. And they had a camera with them and a cell phone, and they took photographs of the Toyota RAV4. And as you can see, when the RAV4 eventually was taken to the crime laboratory, of course it was photographed, and we can see on the right-hand side the presence of blood in the back of the RAV4 in the cargo area. There were droplets of blood stains throughout the back cargo area, and these were photographed. Also in the Toyota RAV4, there was a cherry Pepsi can, and as you can see here, it was wrapped around with a tissue. All right, now these, of course, were all photographed, and the Toyota RAV4 was swabbed by Cherie Culhane. She had done all the swabbing of the Toyota RAV4. All right, now, also on November the 8th, human cremains were found allegedly in Stephen Avery's burn pit. However, human cremains were also found in Yunder burn barrel number 2, and there appeared to be human cremains in the Manitowoc County gravel pit. The cremains were collected, and as you can see here, they were placed in a box. Well, one of the human cremains, as you can see here in the middle picture, had some charred muscle tissue. So one can see we have both blood, we have a cherry Pepsi can, so potentially we have saliva, and we have muscle tissue. Now, these samples were processed by Cherie Culhane. So if we go to slide number 4, we can see what Cherie Culhane actually did. Now, Cherie Culhane, she was the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory head of the DNA unit. And remember, she's the one that did all the swabbing. And what we have here are results from that analysis. Now, specifically, there are 2 important items I want to discuss. Item A1, this was a stain that was swabbed or recovered from the rear cargo area of the RAV4. Now, I'm not going to get into the controversy about whose RAV4 that was, the color. The color was definitely blue. So, blood was sampled from the back of the Toyota RAV4, and that was referred to as item A1. Also, Cherie Culhane swabbed the wild cherry Pepsi can that was found in the front console of the Toyota RAV4. She developed a PCR profile, and here is the genomic DNA results from that profile. Now, remember, at that stage, they had no idea whose DNA it was. The investigators obviously knew that a person by the name of Teresa Horbach was missing, and the sample showed that the individual who left their DNA was indeed a female. So if you have a look at the marker, amelogenin, you can see an X. That means that if you're a female, you have 2 copies of the X chromosome. If you're a male, you have an X or a Y. So the sample from the blood the blood sample that was in the back of the RAV, also the swab from the wild cherry Pepsi can, which would have been saliva, the DNA was from a female. Now, also, they recovered a piece of charred muscle tissue that was present on a bone. And as you can see here, that was called item BZ. And item BZ, I quote, were two pieces of apparent charred material. So it appears that if you have a look at the cremains, they were all bone fragments, tiny, small bone fragments. By some miracle, some charred material had remained on one of the bones or on several of the bone pieces. Sheriko Hain did a DNA extraction, and lo and behold, what we have here is a sample from a female. So there's one problem, guys, and that is the only thing that was known at that stage was that the DNA, as represented from a swab of blood, saliva, and muscle tissue, all were from a female. And if you look at the alleles, one can quickly see, or the loci, one can quickly see that they appear to be very, very similar. Now, there's been a lot of debate about the results of item BZ. Now, as you can see here, it is not a full genomic DNA profile. In actual fact, it's a partial profile. Lily, do you have a comment?
Well, actually, Mary is asking a question, and I want to get it before it gets, passed. Would the
Of course.
lab normally have just one person test all the samples for a case, or would multiple technicians normally test different pieces of it?
Thank you very much for that question. Look, we all know if you read the transcripts, the trial testimonies, this was a very unusual situation, and that is Sheriko Hain decided off the bat, I think by herself, that she was going to be the lead investigator in this case. In other words, she's the one that did all the swabbing of the Toyota RAV4. Now, we're only talking about the Toyota RAV4 in this situation. She did all the swabbing. She did all the handling of the PCR. In other words, she handled all the DNA samples and did the PCR extractions herself. Jack, do you have a comment?
Just a quick note, and this is minor, but I still think it's kind of important, is the mention of Groffy early on when he first got into the car. I'm just only saying that because apparently he was told to take those two swabs, one from the front and one from the back, if I recall correctly. I wanted to just throw it out there because my trust factor is really low. Anyway, that's all. That's it.
Correct. One of the issues, of course, is the lack of proper documentation, and this is going to come to roost when we're looking at the so-called intimate sample. All right. So to summarize slide 4, and thank you guys for those questions. They're awesome. So to summarize slide 4, the DNA samples from the blood stain, also from the wild cherry Pepsi can, are 100% identical. In other words, they were left by the same female. If we have a look at the charred material, item BZ, we can see that there are common loci and common alleles between all three samples. Now, note, guys, we don't have a full genomic DNA profile from item BZ, and that's very simple to explain. Basically, the bones were cremated. They were exposed to high heat, and an enemy of DNA is fire, heat. Heat normally would destroy DNA. So it really is miraculous that any sample or answers were able to be extracted from the PCR. Now, we all know what Kathleen Zellner's experts wanted to do in regards to retesting those bones. But let's not divert from what we're discussing today. Okay, so we have a problem. We have a DNA genomic profile, but we don't know who deposited or who left their DNA in the Toyota RAV4 and also whose bones that they belong to. All right, now if we have a look at slide 5, lo and behold, it is Special Agent Tom Fassbender who delivers to the state the so-called intimate sample. And it's definitely worth reading out here, guys. Now remember, there are really 3 trial testimonies. There's the pre and post trial, there's the Stephen Avery trial, and there's also the Brendan Dassey trial. And so really one needs to have a look at all those trial testimonies to seek out answers. And I'll read this out, it's important. Question, this is Ken Kratz. And regarding that process, were you asked to identify, obtain, and thereafter have transported to the Wisconsin Crime Laboratory, again, for analysis, what is referred to, and now note, guys, an intimate sample of Teresa Hallbach? Yes. Were you able to identify and were you able to find such a sample? Yes. Would you please tell the judge how you did that, please? Initially, I looked into Teresa Hallbach's health and medical history to see if we could find some such samples, and I was able to locate pap smear slides that she had provided. All were taken from her at the Belen Health up in Green Bay and were being maintained at the Belen Health Lab in Green Bay. They identified 3 or 4 such samples that were taken during the past 5 years. They maintained those samples for 5 years. So in other words, guys, this particular laboratory in Green Bay keep the pap smear samples, the slides, for a period of 5 years. They don't discard them. Question, and your role in the identification of such samples, I should say, recognizing that role, were you then also asked to retrieve and have transported those intimate samples to specifically Cherie Culhane at the crime lab in Madison for analysis? Answer, yes, I obtained them from Belen Health Lab. They were packaged and sealed. I put them in another envelope and sealed them, and they were ultimately transported to the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory. Now, guys, here's Agent Fassbender telling the judge and the jury exactly where he got those pap smear samples from. And the important thing to realize is that the state discovered that Teresa Hallbach had a pap smear test done in 2002. Okay, and the slides were still present. They were still kept at the Belen Health Clinic. All right, so if we have a look at slide number 6, and as one can see, Cherie Culhane was asked the following question, and specifically from a slide, a pap smear of the victim, in this case, Teresa Hallbach, were you able to develop a DNA profile? Answer, yes, I was. And as you can see here, guys, the pap smear itself was referred to as item EF. Cherie Culhane did a full DNA extraction, and she obtained a full, not a partial, but a full genomic DNA profile. And yes, there's been a lot of controversy because in one of the reports, they mentioned from the partial profile from the pap smear. Guys, you can clearly see that the profile from the pap smear itself is a full genomic profile. So there was nothing wrong with that. She was able to extract the DNA from the epithelial cells, which were present on the slide. And as you can see here, it's definitely from a female, as one would expect, but you can see the full genomic DNA profile. Now, why is this important? Well, now that genomic DNA profile is labeled as coming from Teresa Horbach. All right. So now, if we can go to slide number 7, we're nearly finished, guys. What we can see here, a comparison of all the genomic DNA profiles, the relevant ones. And as you can see, items A1 and A14 are a 100% match to the pap smear that belongs to Teresa Horbach. So that means that the blood in the back of the RAV, the saliva in the cherry Pepsi can belong to Teresa Horbach. Furthermore, if we have a look at item BZ, which was the charred muscle found on the bone, we can see that there are 7 alleles, 7 loci, which are a 100% match to the pap smear. Also, and most importantly, you can see that the sample, the muscle tissue from the charred material, is also from a female. Where you see INC, it means inconclusive. In other words, the DNA unfortunately was fragmented and those alleles did not come up. So guys, let's work this out. There are 7 loci that are a 100% match, but there are, if we count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 alleles which are identical. Okay, so whenever you see an 11 and a 16, that means that the victim has 2 copies of that particular locus, right? So 2 copies of that particular locus, and we're looking at a specific allele. So whenever you see an 11, it means that that person has 2 copies of the 11 allele, because you inherit one from your mother and inherit one from your father. And of course, the charred material comes from a female. Yes, it is indeed a partial profile, no question. And remember, back then, you needed 15 out of 15 match. Before you can say with absolute certainty that the person that you're trying to compare the sample to a standard is indeed that person. And today, of course, we know that the FBI are much more stringent now. You now need 20 different loci to match. So, what did King Kratz say in the trial? I quote, so, this is talking to Cherie Cohen. So, the 7 out of 7 loci, in other words, the DNA analysis, at least to the frequency of 1 in 1 billion, matched between that of Teresa Horbach and that of the charred remains. Is that correct? Answer, that is correct. Now, guys, essentially what that means is the follows. The chance that item BZ was not from Teresa Horbach was 1 in a billion, right? So it's very, very likely that item BZ definitely comes from the same person who produced the pap smear, and in this case, Teresa Horbach. All right, but why is this controversial? Guys, let's have a look at slide number 8. All right, now This is what King Kratz said, and this really relates to the importance of the pap smear to the state. And I quote, "Now, the standard is also called an exemplar, because remember, when the state forensic laboratory had those results initially, they didn't know who it belonged to." I quote, "You are going to hear those two statements, but Teresa Hallbach, before the 31st of October, had a pap smear performed, a cervical swab that was performed, and thankfully for us, that was kept at Bellin up in Green Bay. Well, Cherie, also Miss Culhane, also was able to develop a DNA profile from the pap smear. We know that's Teresa's. And from that exemplar, from that example, matches the tissue on the leg bone, matches the blood, matches the soda can. Now, note what King Kratz says. We can say with 100% certainty that those human remains are those of Teresa Hallbach. Now, that's a very, very powerful statement to make to the jury and the judge. Jack.
No way. I'm not a scientist either. No way. It's completely misleading. To me, he flat out lied. That's it.
Right. Yes. Thank you, Jack. What Ken Kratz really should have said was he should have quoted the statistics and said it is highly suggestive that item BZ is from Teresa Hallbach. You cannot say with 100% certainty. So here, the judge and the jury have heard from the prosecuting attorney that it's 100% Teresa Hallbach. Jack.
Just one more brief comment. And I remember this, and again, I'm no scientist, I don't have that background, but from what people that are in that arena have said since I got involved with the case, is that at the time in 2005, 2007, the FBI required 9 loci before they would say, yes, this is that person. We're going to accept it as an identification. Maybe not
Right.
100%, but we can pretty much wrap it up and say, here we go. We know that this is this person.
Oh, Jack, you're turning into a piano. Okay. Correct.
Oh.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Sorry. Let me see if
no problems at all. No problems at all. And we'll open up the discussion to the panel very, very soon. Lily,
Okay.
do you have a quick... Thank you, Jack. Lily, do you have a quick comment?
Just the fact that Kratz wanted to make an agreement
Yeah.
for information should be the biggest red signal that
Correct. No question. Thank you, Lily. Neville, do you have a quick comment?
Yes, what Lily said, it's like making a deal with the devil. His reputation is tainted one. His reputation, should we call it even a reputation? I just don't know how a highly suggestive result could be good enough for the truth to the family.
Correct.
Is it good enough for sending 2 individuals for life in prison just because it's highly suggestive?
Correct. And this is something that, thank you, Neville. This is something that we see continuously throughout this trial. And that's why we all wanted to do this particular special podcast, because it's about the forensics. It's about the plan that the state had in place. Now, quite clearly, Ken Kratz and the other attorneys would have definitely spoken with the Hallbach family. And upon that identification done by Cherie Culhane, they would have told the Hallbach family, look, your daughter is dead. Right? So they would have known, they would have realized that from the forensic DNA results that their daughter was indeed the victim and she was deceased. So they would have known that fairly early on once the results were done. Don't forget, the FBI also did mitochondrial DNA analysis, I believe also on a tissue sample as well, because there were multiple tissue samples, not just the one. And I did a presentation on this, and essentially the FBI could not rule out Teresa Halbach as being the victim. So when you look at the mitochondrial DNA evidence, the genomic DNA evidence, the conclusion was by the state that the victim was indeed Teresa Halbach. Sammy, do you have a quick comment?
Yep, Travis says after the FBI went to 9, Arizona found 2 people in their database with a 10 loci that matched.
Right, you mean the same profile?
That was his comment, so I thought I
Right,
better
right.
put it out there.
You're right. Yes, and that's why the FBI now stipulates that you got to have a 20 out of 20 loci match. Now, if that, remember, we're looking at statistics. We're not looking at absolute values. We're looking at statistics. So if it's 1 in a billion, there's more than 1 billion people on this planet, which means that depending on how many people, I forgot what the current number of people are. Let's just say 7 billion people on this planet. It means that there is at least 7 people with the same genetic profile as item BZ. Exactly the same. In other words, a 7 out of 7 loci match. So therefore, Ken Kratz cannot say that those cremains are 100% certain to belong to Teresa Halbach. He erred. And this is a problem. The state didn't have a molecular biologist, the defense didn't have a molecular biologist who had a genetics background, right? And they could have easily counteracted Cohen's and also Ken Kratz's statement about the statistics. But they were devastating for the defense because the impression was, hey, these cremains are a 100% match. There's no issue here at all. All right. Now, guys, if we can go to slide 9, we're nearly done, guys. If we have a look at slide 9, I'll just bring up slide 9. Beautiful. Here's the big problem. And that is both the state and the defense both agreed upon a stipulation. And we're talking here about this so-called intimate sample. And I'll read it. Now remember, this is an agreement done by the defense and the state. And I'll quote, first, that the DNA exemplar of the victim in this case, Teresa Halbach, which consisted of a pap smear, a cervical sample, would be admitted without the necessity of providing witnesses as to its how it was obtained, how it was stored, or the transport thereof. There will be testimony as to the DNA analysis performed by the Wisconsin Crime Lab, but authentication and transport witnesses, Mr. Strang has agreed, would not be required. If the judge wants to inquire of Mr. Strang as we do these one at a time, that's fine. Or I can do them en masse. I don't care how the court wants to proceed. So therefore, guys, what this means was no paperwork authenticating those pap smears were entered into evidence. If we have a look on CASO, page 912, we can see that those pap smears, they were present as slides, and they were given a specific property tag number. So they're definitely mentioned in the CASO report. And really, the question I want to put forward is, should we be suspicious of the state? Now, remember, no paperwork was presented to the judge or the jury. Both the state and the defense agreed that the pap smears were from Teresa Halbach. Now, I just want to point out something to our listeners. If you didn't have the pap smear, there literally is no case, because you can't link those genomic DNA profiles present in the RAV4 to anyone, because no one, Teresa Horbach is missing. She can't give a DNA sample, of course. Jack, do you have a comment?
Right. As I understand it, they had to have a known sample from whoever, in this case, Teresa, that they knew was isolated. They couldn't just say, well, we can get it from her, her clothes or, whatever. It had to be
Correct.
something that wasn't mingling somewhere that it could have touched something else.
Correct. As if you read the trial testimonies, if you go through CASO, it's pretty obvious that Wiegert, Fassbender, other law enforcement officers went to Teresa's home, and Bibi will testify to you that it was a lot of police officers that went down there, or law enforcement officers that went down there. Right, Bibi?
I was up to like I had paperwork that said like 133 off somebody's spreadsheet, and then
Right.
and
Yes.
then I found 2 more because I was looking at queso and at the time, and I happened to spot 2 more, so
Right.
it was like 135 times that
Right.
basically any officer crossed the threshold into Teresa's house.
Right. So it's quite obvious that a lot of, thank you, Bibi. It's quite obvious that a lot of forensic material or potential forensic material was taken from Teresa Horbach's residence, where she was staying with Scott Blowdorn. Now, we know that Wiegert and other law enforcement officers, I think, took 7 pairs of panties, both clean ones and dirty ones. There was also a vibrator that was found as well as hair samples, etc., etc. But as Jack pointed out, you can't just then isolate DNA and say, yep, this is from Teresa Horbach, because you can have potential contamination. So therefore, the sample is not pure. The reason why the pap smear sample is your exemplar is because the hospital knows that Teresa Horbach came in, gave a pap smear, and the pap smear samples were labeled with her name. Jack.
Just a question, because I don't know, and I read a comment, I can't tell you where, that someone suggested that using a pap smear is not an ideal way to derive DNA because of things that I can't understand. Is there any truth to that? And if there is, can you briefly explain?
Well, essentially, obviously, I've never had a pap smear done, but essentially, you've got scrapings from the cervix. So you've got epithelial cells. Now, the epithelial cells, they're fine. They contain a nucleus. And you can extract DNA from cells that have a nucleus. That's not a problem at all. So what Cherie Culhane would have done was she would have scraped the epithelial cells from the slide, probably either using a swab or a scalpel, and then extracted DNA from that. There's no problems at all. As long as you have enough cells that their nuclei are still intact, you'll be able to extract DNA from them, no problems at all. However, it's not ideal. I agree. What you would really want is a buccal swab or a sample of blood. That's much more ideal because your yields of DNA will be much higher. But in this particular case, there was only the pap smear available. Fortunately, there was enough cells on the pap smear to provide DNA. And don't forget, you actually don't need much DNA at all, because what Cherie Cohen did a PCR, an amplification of that DNA. Lily.
What Travis pointed out in chat was, we keep saying they got a DNA profile like it was a full profile, but they have never to this day gotten a full profile on her. From my understanding.
Yeah, I mean, remember, we're talking about 2005. So
Yeah,
from
so I mean, they couldn't rule Teresa out, but they really couldn't rule her in either.
By the letter of the law, that is correct. If we have a look at item BZ, it is highly suggestive that the charred muscle tissue belongs to Teresa Horbach. Highly suggestive. But by the letter of the law, not enough loci actually had come up. You needed all 15 out of 15 back in 2005. Jack.
There was another question from a long ago, and I say long ago, probably a couple of years, that I got into a conversation with someone that apparently did have a background in this kind of thing. And the way it was explained to me was that item BZ, that Cherie Cohen amplified, I don't want to say this wrong, but she amplified the results overly much to get the results she did, because the sample head was so degraded. Does that make sense? So
yes.
She just did it like her normal route that it wouldn't have shown. So she continued to amplify those specific areas to get the result that she did. I don't know if that's true, because again, it's not my background. So I get a little lost in it.
Yeah. So essentially what happens, guys, is this. Now, I do have a background in molecular biology and in molecular genetics. So essentially what she would have done was taken a piece of the charred material, the muscle, and did a DNA extraction. So what happens is she would have got a sample of pure DNA, right? So it would have been clean. It would have just been DNA. But the problem with that DNA sample it would have been fragmented. In other words, instead of long pieces of DNA, there would have been smaller pieces of DNA. The PCR amplification is all done by machine. Cherie Cohen just simply adds the components together and places them in a machine. All the results are done by a machine and recorded on a computer. The computer gives a printout, and Cherie Cohen will present the data that comes from the computer. In other words, all the parameters are set by the computer. If the values of those loci are too low, in other words, if the amplification is too low, the peaks will be below the threshold. You can't make a definitive statement. You might see a tiny peak, but because it's not significant, you can't actually count it as a result. So when she obtained the results from item BZ, those particular 7 loci would have shown up as normal natural peaks. So in other words, you can't over amplify. You do the amplification step as a series, all in a tube, and it's done in a machine. So even if you did another round of PCR amplification, you get exactly the same result. So you can't really over amplify because the machine has got parameters. Now, quite clearly, guys, to avoid all the controversy, what you do is you do it again, right? It's as simple as that. You have a third party, another expert in the field, re-extract the muscle tissue from the beginning, and you do it again. And of course, what you use now is not the old system that was very sensitive to DNA that was broken down. Use the anti-rapid DNA system that uses very specific markers. Now, wait for it, on smaller fragments. So in other words, it's perfect to use the anti-rapid DNA system on burn victims, right? Because it has a different amplification system. It's much more sensitive, and it would have been ideal to test using the anti-rapid DNA system. And as, of course, as we know, unfortunately, the state gave away the bones. I'm not sure about item BZ. Gave away the bones back to the Horbach family in 2011. So retesting, guys, may not be possible again, unfortunately. Kim.
Well, also in reading through some material, they had
Oh,
Christine Rudy's
yes,
pap smear as well as Teresa
yes.
Hallback. So to me, that's a little bit suspect.
Oh, look, and yes, I understand where you're going with this. There's no question. Obviously, what needs to be redone is de novo testing, and by that I mean we start again. We get all the swabs, we get all the DNA samples, and we re-extract them by a third party, do double-blind analysis, and make sure that all the comparisons are themselves legitimate. I agree. So, guys, let's finish this, or never get to discuss. If we have a look at slide 9, the ending of slide 9, the question I pose is, should we be suspicious of the state? And the answer, of course, is if we look at slide 10, we definitely have to be suspicious of the state. Guys, if you followed our podcast, you would have seen this slide probably 10 times. The reason why we need to be suspicious is for the fact that the lead investigator, Tom Fassbender, now remember, it was Fassbender that found and recovered the pap smear samples, right? So here we have Fassbender phoning Culhane, who did all the swabbing, who did all the PCR analysis, and he asked Culhane, tried to put her in his house or garage. Now that is ridiculous, and honestly, I cannot believe that the judge didn't throw out the case then and there. Bibi, do you have a comment?
You might as well add car to that list.
Yes. So correct. So we've got this massive conflict of interest going on here. Now remember, Fassbender was the lead investigator in the case, along with Wiegert. Fassbender is the one that finds the exemplar DNA sample. In other words, the sample that everything is compared to. That pap smear represents Teresa Horbach. And guys, if we didn't have that pap smear, there would be no case. Because all you will have is DNA profile from an unknown female. That's it. You can't actually compare it to anything because there's no exemplar. Well, Fassbender obviously was in communication with Culhane, and he asked her, try to put her in his house or garage, which is very inappropriate because, guys, you need fair forensic testing. And as you can see, it was done very early on in the case on the 11th of November. This is when material was just starting to come into the laboratory. Okay, well, here's the main issue, and this is why it's extremely controversial. And guys, here's my last slide, slide number 11. And there is a DOJ Division of Criminal Investigation report that actually mentions the pap smears. And there are 3 pap smear slides. But if you have a look on the left-hand side, there are also 3 reports about the analysis of the pap smears. So we can see on the right-hand side that Fassbender had obtained the pap smears on November the 21st. 2005. But the person who gave him the slides had enclosed laboratory reports, and you can actually see it right here in the report that was written. So I quote, enclosed laboratory reports corresponding and identifying each slide with the date they were taken or processed. So guys, if the reports are available, where are they? Where are these reports, and why haven't we seen them, and why weren't they presented to the judge and the jury? Crazy. So in other words, guys, we have to have faith that those slides are indeed from Teresa Halbach, right? The whole case impinges on those slides. Bibi, do you have a comment?
No, go ahead, finish. Yeah.
All right. So, guys, what we're going to do here is, and Zoe's going to set this up, we're going to play a little short clip. I believe it goes for about 4 minutes. And then after the clip, we'll open up the discussion to the panel. Zoe, are we all ready to go with this audio clip?
Yes.
Okay, let's hope we can hear it, or the audience can hear it.
Do you need people to tell you if it's working?
Yes, please. Yeah, if we can get some feedback, that'd be awesome.
Is there any way you can, get on? Can she hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, she can hear. Okay. If
Okay.
you want to, we've got 4 minutes. If you want to, real quick, I can just let her ask her question before we get started. Okay, let's go ahead and do that.
Okay.
Okay, I'll go ahead and bring her on down. All right, great. Thank you. Okay, Laura, you're
4
with
minutes until showtime.
Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
So Ken, the only question that I had that I could not get I couldn't figure out an answer to. Now, I have a criminal justice background, but I can't understand what the purpose was when you were getting evidence on Teresa Halbach, why you needed her vibrator or her pap smear on a criminal investigation of a homicide.
Well, the only reason that you know about a vibrator in this case is because Zellner put that on her little MAM2. We had an agreement, myself and Mr. Strang had an agreement that would never be made public.
3 minutes until showtime.
To be disrespectful to the memory of Teresa Halbach. What they were looking for was what's called an intimate sample, or a DNA exemplar that they were able to test, a known sample that they were able to test against her blood that was found in the SUV. You see, we didn't have Teresa's DNA at all, despite Zellner and other defense attorneys' claims that we had her DNA somewhere. Where would we have gotten it from? So the only person that had her DNA was the killer, and that was that her blood was around. And so they seized her toothbrush and other things in her apartment to be a source of DNA to test against.
2 minutes until showtime.
But what happened was we had to get a sample that was officially connected to her, and so they got the pap smear as the intimate sample, as the sample used then to test against the blood and other DNA matches that they had gotten. And again, I am incredibly disappointed that part of the report wasn't redacted. Again, it was an agreement by the prosecution and the defense not to injure or harm this woman's memory, yet you can see how well that went with Attorney Zellner. So it was put on the screen just for the reason, Laura, that it is coming about right now, to get people to talk about it and to get people to, in some way,
1 minute until showtime.
To comment on either Teresa's lifestyle or her private behavior, I think it's despicable, and I wish that it would have remained redacted just where it remained, because it's not relevant at all to this investigation.
Okay,
Well,
but going with that, is that you said that it was normally like secretive. Is that how it normally is? Because I've in like all my research, I've never heard of that. So is it normally secretive like that?
well, it's not secretive. We agreed not to injure this woman's memory by doing that. There's nothing secretive about it. It's not like we were hiding anything. The defense attorney and I had agreed not to publicly discuss it. So, all right, go ahead, Lisa. You want to?
Well, yeah, I just want to remind. Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4.
Oh, we have
3,
5 seconds.
2, 1.
All right, guys. Zoe, can I confirm from you that the clip is finished?
Yes, Dr. Silkman.
All right. So I'll just make a quick comment. Going from memory, of course. Guys, you heard it straight from Ken Kratz. It's completely ridiculous. First of all, that he blamed Kathleen Zellner for this misfortunate announcement regarding the intimate sample. And guys, we all know, I've read it. I've read it out on our podcast today, that the intimate sample wasn't the vibrator. The intimate sample was indeed the pap smear. And one can see, like I said to you before, we've discussed this in a podcast, that Ken Kratz took on the role as the father of Teresa Halbach and wanted to protect her integrity at all costs, and quite clearly made a big hullabaloo regarding this so-called intimate sample. And that we discussed the vibrator, why would have been a very poor choice to try and extract DNA from, and that the intimate sample, and even Ken Kratz referred to as the intimate sample as the pap smear, not the vibrator. And guys, this is a criminal investigation. Of course it's going to get personal. Of course it's going to get nasty. But Ken Kratz tried to suppress a lot of these things. And one can hear from that little clip the absolute disdain and dislike for Kathleen Zellner, which is remarkable. All right, guys, I hope you have enjoyed the podcast. What we're going to do now is we're going to open up the podcast to the panel as an open discussion. And also, guys, we're going to answer your questions. So go for it, guys. Fire away. Who's got any questions or comments?
Well, mostly the discussion on the chat was a lot about them not having actually had a body.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Of course, the state had to go by with what they had, and there was no body. But remember, we really need to reflect the events that took place at Cuss Road, what actually was found. And if we're going with a planting scenario, to me, it's pretty obvious that they didn't have a body. Because if they had a body, like if they had a tissue sample, they would have extracted DNA from that tissue sample. They wouldn't have to have needed to have gone to a pap smear, right? They would have had the victim then and there. But this suggests very strongly that they could not identify the victim. So whatever they found, and I'm talking about potentially at Cuss Road, they couldn't ID the victim. The victim literally was bone fragments. Guys, any other questions or comments? Jax.
Just thinking back about going back to how Fassbender found out about where this alleged pap smear was kept. I'm just because I can't recall, but I'm just wondering if investigator Ron Hilligus helped work that out. I'm being facetious here, but I'm really not, because he was clearly involved in
Right.
various things with, in helping Fassbender, and Fassbender really wasn't too shy about sharing that information. So I'm just wondering, how did this all come about that he found out about?
Well,
and I'm sure that they have ways to find, but this came
yes.
about pretty quick.
Yes. Well, in that DOJ report, they actually highlight the history of how the samples were found. And what Fassbender did was he spoke with Karen, Teresa Horbach's mother, and she gave a couple of suggestions. And they also, believe it or not, spoke with Ryan Hilligus. But in the DOJ report, they said Kilgus, right? Not Hilligus. And he suggested
him.
Yes, they did. They misidentified him, but he's on a sign-in sheet as Kilgus as well, which is interesting.
One of the officers keep putting him down as Killigus. I think it's Fassbender. I'm not sure, but there's one that always writes his name as Killigus.
Yes.
Maybe that's a Freudian thing. I don't know.
Yes, correct. But it's interesting that you've got the same name being mentioned in a DOJ report. Neverly, do you have a quick comment?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the why would they call it, Dr. An intimate sample rather than the pap smear? Because it's only natural to speculate and to wonder what's going on, because a pap smear is called everywhere in the world a pap smear.
Correct. I think Ken Kratz didn't want to talk about it. That's why he called it. I have no idea. That's why he referred to it as the intimate sample. He wanted it hush hush. And he obviously got very, very angry that Kathleen Zona even dared mention the intimate sample. But Ken Kratz mistakenly thought they were talking about the vibrator rather than the pap smear. And it's clear in testimony the intimate sample was indeed the pap smear, nothing else. Bibi, do you have a quick comment?
I think it was part of the whitewashing of Teresa, because they wanted, all the way down to, the only reason why she went to bars was to do karaoke because she really loved to sing.
Correct.
She's a college student out experiencing life, and I have some pictures where she looks pretty drunk doing karaoke and drinking shots. So,
Yes.
Yeah, they whitewashed her. They deliberately, to make her look sainted, and
Yeah, there was just a comment that I can see here on chat. The intimate sample that Ken Kratz referred to when you spoke to the reporter was the vibrator, whereas the intimate sample that was referred to in the trial testimony by Ken Kratz was the pap smear sample, right? So, yes, a vibrator was collected from the Horbach residence, but I don't believe, I could be wrong, that a DNA sample was extracted from it.
It could be probably like cross-referenced, right? Because potentially many people could have used it, not to get into details, but you know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah.
Correct. And the main issue is that you need an exemplar, right? Which means that you need a sample, a pure DNA sample that is 100% associated with that person. That's why when you do a blood test, they write your name immediately on the blood tube. So the person taking the blood knows it's directly from you and it's going directly in the blood tube with your name and details on it. So there's no possibility of a mix-up or an impure sample.
Yeah, I just think that he's confusing everybody with this intimate sample versus a pap smear business, because people could wonder. As I said, it could be a pap smear, it could be STD test, it could be a pregnancy test, it could be a cervical cancer test, it could be human papilloma virus test, it could be all kinds of stuff. Why didn't he say what it was?
Correct. Well, like I said, he was playing smoke and mirrors with it. And he obviously didn't. Yes, he obviously did not want it openly discussed. And in actual fact, guys, we know that they did a stipulation. They didn't even present information regarding the pap smear. Jack, do you have a quick comment?
Right. Well, leading into, and I'm not discounting everything that has been said, but just thinking, around another way here. Let's think about regional dialect, regional differences between, and I know, I'm not sure how much it is different across the world, but I do know that in the United States that regional things are very specific to that area. And you may not, somebody from the Northwest may not know of anything that happens in the Northeast and vice versa, So
yes,
him speaking specifically and calling this pap smear an intimate sample, I just throwing it out there. Is this some kind of regional thing that is like, you don't mention, an unmentionable thing that, okay. I just want to make sure that, you know what I'm saying, from the state of Wisconsin. I'm not,
where I live. No.
Yes.
Yeah, I live in Wisconsin. No, and I've lived in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois.
Yes.
No.
Just wanted to make sure that this wasn't something that's, like frowned
Indiana
on.
too. Indiana too.
You don't dare.
Yeah.
You don't dare say this in public.
No. Pap smear. They're pap smear.
Yes.
Okay.
In junior high, in the girls' bathroom, everywhere. They're pap
smear. Yeah. I haven't seen on a website, please come in for an intimate sample. It's always referred to as a pap smear, but now it's a cervical screen. It's a different type of test now. But yeah, it would have been universally spoken of as a pap smear back then. BB.
Oh, sorry, I left it on.
Yeah. Yep. So I understand what Jack is trying to say, but there should be nothing nefarious about calling it what it is, a pap smear. Why Ken Kratz referred to it as an intimate sample, I don't know whether he said that as respect to the Hallbach family, but jeepers, it's a medical sample. It's a routine medical sample. Lily.
That because he's a sick man.
Yes.
Everything was a little sexually tainted with him.
Still is.
And he's just a nasty, nasty dude.
I agree.
Yes, I agree. Well, it is bizarre. It really is bizarre. It should have been called for what it was. And we have the controversy today regarding the the intimate sample. Why wasn't the corresponding documentation presented in court? Why was this so-called gentleman's agreement or stipulation made? It's crazy, because when you think about it, guys, it's the exemplar, right? Which means that all the DNA samples that were, all the swabs that were taken from the RAV4 and other forensic pieces of evidence were compared to the pap smear. So the pap smear represented a DNA sample, a pure DNA sample from Teresa Hallbach. And like I said, if we look at the results that we've got and you look at item BZ is very highly suggestive of belonging to Teresa Horbach. My own opinion is that that is Teresa Horbach. She is deceased. However, to the letter of the law, you can't exactly state that. You needed a 15 out of 15 loci match. Today, you need a 20 out of 20 loci match before you can say or claim that DNA sample really did belong to a particular individual. But hey, we've been through this. That's exactly why Kathleen Zellner wanted to test the samples again. So, that's the frustrating part. But the whole idea of this podcast, guys, was to show the importance of that sample to the case and to the state. Jack.
I think that, not to throw too much shade on the defense lawyers at the time, and I know that they tried to do a lot of their own rebuttal or witnesses, but I think that in this instance that they really failed themselves by not getting an expert. And I also really think it was a major snafu to accept this stipulation, because they could just say, hell, this came from, we got this, guys, and it's a really good sample. Don't you agree? And they say, oh, yeah, sure. Why in the hell would you do that? Without the proper chain of custody, yes. Yeah, that kind of thing. That's
Correct. And what is frustrating, guys, is that if you've got the paperwork and it's already done, and obviously whoever gave Fassbender the pap smears slides actually wrote it all up, wrote a report. So therefore, you really didn't even need to have a witness come in to give that testimony. The report was written.
There should have been there should be a chain of custody procedure or paper trail.
Yes. If you read that report that I put up, it stipulates or basically highlights all the steps that were taken with the evidence. And I'm talking about the pap smear slides that Fassbender had put them in an envelope, put them in a bigger envelope, put evidence tape on it, etc., etc. So it should have not have been an issue. Presented in court, present the paperwork, everyone agrees, yep, that's a true sample from Teresa Horbach, no controversy. And here we are in 2020, and we're discussing the so-called intimate sample. And even Ken Kratz got confused what the intimate sample was, and he blamed Kathleen Zellner for it, right? So it's ridiculous how on the one hand, he can do a press conference on March the 2nd and spill the beans with no evidence at all, and yet is upset when Kathleen Zellner mentions the fact that, hey, they did go to Teresa Horbach's residence, and yes, they did find a vibrator and other items, right? Which is exactly what will happen in a forensic case. That's normal procedure.
Well, which is surprising.
Oh, sorry, Jack.
I was just going to say, Jack, it's just surprising that they would collect. If they had no intentions of using those items, why do they collect them? Because there again goes back to, we can say for sure that this came from Teresa. Why would they even freaking collect it at all?
Right. Yes.
They didn't test any of them.
No. I mean, I've got my theory, and it is a theory, and it is potentially nefarious. I believe they got all the underwear. I'm not sure whether they got bras, but they certainly got both dirty and clean panties. I think they were going to potentially set up Brendan or Stephen for rape. Because if you look at the questioning of Brendan, one thing that Fassbender and Wiegert persistently ask him, what about the panties? What about the bra? What color were they? Did you see any? And Brendan, of course, never saw a thing. He goes, nope, nope, nope. What did you do with the clothing? So if they happen to remember, there was no forensic evidence against Brendan Dassey. If a planting scenario took place, the planters had no idea about Brendan. Brendan came on late in the scene and completely stuffed up everything. So the mere fact that the investigators were asking Brendan about panties and their color, and also don't forget they had his pants, they potentially could have put two and two together to frame him. But of course they had nothing, because Brendan never said, oh, I saw a pair was red or it was black. He had no idea. Neverly, did you have a comment?
Yes, I agree with what you're saying. I could totally see how that could have happened, that Brendan came in later and then the 7 pair of panties came in play as well. But I actually wanted to go back a little bit on the DNA and if Teresa is dead or alive. Was it proven? We're all wondering. We all feel like it wasn't proven that was Teresa due to the partial DNA, due to the nefarious and just like wishy-washy stuff what the state did with cherry cocaine and Kratz. So I was chatting right now during the live with Travis Williamson. He's an attorney, and he said you don't need to have DNA to prove corpus delicti or delicti, which is a dead body, a body.
Yes.
So I said, so he said, you don't have to have DNA partial or otherwise to prove the body is dead. I think this is just my interpretation. And we all know English is my second language, so please bear with me. And then he said they did prove Teresa was dead under the law.
Well, if you remove the DNA sample, I'm talking about item BZ. They if the pap smear was indeed from Teresa Horbach, the only thing you can say was that the blood and the saliva matched, right? Now, the saliva obviously is not nefarious. She was drinking from the can. The blood, well, hey, anything could potentially explain the blood. But they tried to identify her by a tooth root, but the orthodontist was not prepared to give a definitive answer on whose root that belonged to.
He actually said, Dr. Simley, I'm sorry for interruption. He said he cannot say that this belongs to Teresa.
Correct. Because this is the bizarre thing. My understanding is that teeth are very hard to burn. Where are the teeth?
Yes.
Oh,
that you actually have to grind them even if when they're properly cremated. Teeth survive.
Correct.
Yeah.
So somebody went to great extent to prevent the identification of that body.
Yes.
Where the teeth?
Yeah, exactly. They put them away, probably for safekeeping again. Yeah.
Yes. So this what isn't bizarre in this case?
Exactly. But Mr. Williamson, Travis Williamson here on chat says that they did prove Teresa was dead under the law. And I said, what do you mean? How do you prove that? And he says, under the old common law, you had to have a dead body to prove it, that somebody is dead, right? Well, he says that's called Hale's rule, and that hasn't been in effect for 150 years, right? Then he says, all you need now is someone to testify that a person is missing and an article of their clothing. Could you imagine? That's kind of a low bar. And he says, look at the sister's testimony. That's all they needed. That's why it's not even an issue on an appeal. So I'm like, do you mean the blue lanyard or the Daisy Fuentes one rivet and half a zipper? And he says both, but mainly jeans.
Right. Okay.
Wow.
Well, hey, I don't have a legal background and I
Me
can't
neither.
comment.
That's why I wanted to pick on his brain. Thank you, Travis.
Yes, thank you very much for those comments. But clearly, it's pretty obvious that the state went to a lot of effort to find that pap smear sample in order to compare the genomic DNA profiles of the blood, also from the cherry Pepsi can, and that they matched the pap smear. Now, don't forget, guys, no bones have. This is where we're at the moment. And that's why Kathleen Zellner would like to definitively prove one way or another whose cremains that they belong to. Guys, do we have any other comments? K9.
Well, you know, we talk about Stephen Avery's blood being planted in that RAV. What's to say that Teresa didn't have some kind of a blood test done for something that she, you know, needed for a job or something like that, and that her blood wasn't planted as well in the RAV? I mean,
Yeah, well,
if they're down for planting blood,
Exactly.
you know,
yeah.
I mean,
I
I've been thinking about that for a while, and
yeah, look, I honestly can't comment. I mean, anything is possible, but remember, the more complex the framing scenario, the harder it is. Because whoever planted the blood would have had to have planted not only Stephen Avery's blood, but also Teresa Halbach's blood. But we are relying on the honesty of Cohen. So all the swabbing was done by Cherie Cohen. All the results came back from Cherie Cohen. So one has to assume that everything was done legit, that the swabs were done properly, that the extractions, the PCR results were all done legitimately, and that they came back as being correct. So in other words, when they initially tested the blood and the saliva from the RAV4, they didn't know who it belonged to, right? It was an unknown female. When they tested the blood at the front, it came back as a hit because what they did is that they ran it through CODIS, and up came Stephen Avery's name, right? So that's why they said, okay, his name's come up. We want another sample from him to confirm that it actually is Stephen Avery. So that's how they did it. They did it in a stepwise fashion. In the meantime, Fassbender was asking the family, okay, has your daughter given blood? Has your daughter done this? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was Ryan Hilligus who mentioned the fact that she went to the, was it obstetrics and gynecology? I think it was some term that he used. So Fassbender got a lot of information from Karen, but also by talking from Ryan. And so apparently Teresa Halbach visited a dermatologist for skin. So potentially DNA could have been extracted if they had a skin sample, but also she gave plasma. But from plasma, it's the fluid part of the blood. You're not going to find really DNA in that plasma. So Fassbender spoke to the family, but also to Ryan Hilligus, which led him to Bellin, the clinic, and they just happened to have pap smear samples belonging to Teresa Halbach. Okay, guys. Any other questions?
I think this is so cool.
Neverly.
All the questions and answers, Dr. Silkman, thank you so much for answering them. I think this is very cool.
No, pleasure. We really need to cover stuff like this because soon we'll be doing MAM 2. And MAM 2 is all about the forensic evidence. So it's great that our listening audience has got a much better understanding of the forensics and what they did, as well as the shenanigans that took place, of course. Lily, do you have a comment?
Kathleen said the devil's in the details.
Correct. And we know this case, there are a lot of shady elements, unfortunately. So really, I want to go, I know this is going to be controversial. This is going to be controversial, but so be it. I'm going to go through the panel. I want you to give me your opinion. Now, you've listened to the presentation today. You've heard the forensic evidence. Based on that forensic evidence, I want you to tell me, is the victim Teresa Horbach? Yes or no? Bibi, give me your thoughts.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So the forensic evidence that has been gathered so far, you're not convinced?
Not at all. And as Kim said, the person who's planting Steve's blood in there could very easily have planted whoever else's everything. There's
Okay.
there's a couple of people off the top of my head, and I've heard a third name too that I can't think of, whose stuff they could have had and put there. And as far as a mitochondrial sample, I believe it could have been a mother or a grandmother of one of those three girls that went missing, disappeared forever, or killed during a very close amount of time in the nearby area.
Okay. Thank you, Bibi. Jack.
I think that strictly from what was presented and what we can get our hands on, no. I don't think that they absolutely said, or we can say with certainty, this is Teresa. I caveat that with going back with everything that we know and all the shady, what seems to be underhanded dealings, place her in the house or the garage. Fassbender's single-handedly handling this evidence that has no apparent paper trail or witnesses. But I also add this to the mix, and we have to consider it, even if we say, okay, we can't prove for a fact based on what we have that Teresa's dead. We have to recognize the difficulty in completely removing someone from their life. That is difficult. And, I'm sure it can be done. I'm sure it has been done. But to completely disappear someone, and this is, Teresa was not like a lone ranger off in the, and had nothing. She had a pretty wide social circle. So you also have to say, did she want to leave her life? I asked myself this when all this stuff came up. So, I have to consider that. And again, the other end of that is, from what I could see, even in reading her journal, I can't take from that she really wanted to just walk away. That's my 2 cents. I think she's dead, but I don't think the state actually proved it from a scientific forensic standpoint.
Right. But I've been reading thank you, Jack. I've been reading some of the comments in chat that Travis Williamson has stated, and he says that you really actually don't need any scientific evidence. So now, I am not a lawyer. I'm not from the legal profession. If that is indeed the case, why did the state pursue a pap smear? If you don't need any scientific evidence, why did they bother even with a pap smear, and why did they do DNA extractions? So in other words, what was the whole idea of extracting DNA try to extract DNA from the muscle and bones? Why do that? Lily, do you have a comment?
make sure that they nailed him this time, and they were willing to go to any lengths to do it.
Yes.
That's my thought.
Yes. 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 There's no question about that. Bibi, do you have a comment?
Well, wasn't there some comment made by Kratz or somebody to Cohen about you don't really have to prove this or that, you just have to create the illusion?
Perception. Correct.
The perception, yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Perception.
That's why they wanted to create,
yeah.
and I use that word specifically, create the illusion.
Perceptions being what they are.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Yeah, correct.
So that Stephen really wasn't convicted on like evidence. It was how it was presented and swirled and twirled, and oh, look at that shiny, I think it was just how it was presented.
Correct. I think for me personally, well, there's many things, and we've talked about it in our podcasts. The mere fact that you don't find any in situ photographs of bones, human cremains, in the burn pit is very, very damning in itself. And when you have a look at the new photographs that have been released and other photographs, you can see that heavy equipment was used to dig out the burn pit, Stephen Avery's burn pit. Under no circumstances would you allow any heavy equipment in a burn pile with a body. It's all done on your hands and knees, and it's done with brushes. And every piece of forensic evidence is tagged and photographed. The mere fact that we don't find that is very highly suspicious. Secondly, it's pretty obvious that something major took place at Cuss Road because it looks like it's been processed like a proper crime scene, right? Cuss Road deer camp has been suppressed.
They moved how many people or officers there? It was well over a dozen immediately. When it got reported.
Correct.
Blocked the road off, taped it up, wouldn't let the dogs in past a certain point. It was a crime scene. There's no doubt about it.
Correct. And they also had lights, tarps, the whole lot. Sammy, do you have a comment?
Well, I was in the beginning. No.
Sammy, you're breaking up, unfortunately. Can you repeat your question?
You're real quiet, far away.
Me?
No,
or Sammy? Sammy. Yeah, I think she's going to come back in. Yes, indeed. I'll just wait till Sammy comes back in, unless anyone's got a comment. Sammy.
Is that any better?
That's much better.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, sorry. So when I first started this case, automatically when I got into it, because to me, they did not prove scientifically to me. I know what the law is. I get that now. Thanks to Travis. Thank you, Travis.
Fabulous
but
comments.
In my mind, I absolutely was not convinced. They did not do their job to prove to me. Thank God I wasn't on their jury for him. But
yes.
I didn't believe that. Well, now, and that's before I knew anything really about this. Now, let's say no, because they had access to a body and bodies, family, and a body of which a DNA card could have been made and used to rename.
Correct. Thank you, Sammy. I mean, for me, the biggest issue that I have is the fact that Cherie Cohen made herself in charge of the forensic investigation. And if anyone should not have gone anywhere near the forensic material was Cherie Cohen, because she had a long history with Stephen Avery. Neverly, do you have a comment?
Didn't Cherie volunteer for this task?
She did. Yes, she did. Yes, she volunteered. She wanted to be in charge of the forensic analysis, and Ken Kratz even stated that in court when he said that she did all the sampling, she did all the swabbing, or the majority of the swabbing, and she did the forensic analysis. Keep in mind that Cherie Cohane did the forensic analysis of the pubic hair that proved that Stephen Avery had not committed the sexual assault on Penny Bernstein, and that the pubic hair had indeed belonged to Gregory Allen. And we mustn't forget that it was Cherie Cohane, through false scientific analysis of hair, convicted Stephen, or it made Stephen look really bad in the Penny Bernstein case. So you've got a long association with Cherie Cohane with Stephen Avery, which means that Cherie Cohane should not have gone anywhere near that forensic evidence. And of course, in a recent podcast, we talked about Item FL, the so-called magic bullet. So it doesn't get any worse than that. It's really, really very nefarious, unfortunately. But I'm very interested in Travis's comments, and if Travis agrees, I reckon we need to get him on the panel for one of our podcasts, looking at the legal aspects of this case. I'm sure people would be fascinated to hear that.
I think I would.
Jack.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think I would. I would really like to hear, what he has to say, and get some interaction.
Yeah. So if Travis has got some spare time, I'd love to get him on one of our panels, and we can discuss the legal aspects of the case. I won't be saying very much at all because I'm not a lawyer, but it's interesting because Ken Kratz, and especially Fallon, they were very, very cluey about the laws, the principles, and they used it to great effect. They used it to great effect, especially on the judge and also on the defense. They were very, very smart. Jack.
Yeah, and they used it. The other side of that is they used the media to great effect as well. We can never forget that.
Correct.
And that began really, if everybody goes back and looks at the old news broadcast of what we have, that began immediately.
Yes, correct. They really did paint a monster, and that's pretty obvious. I've read Ken Kratz's book, and it's pretty obvious that this was personal. This was very personal to Ken Kratz. Ken Kratz behaved in a very unusual manner. He detested Stephen. He detested his notoriety, the fact that he was shaking hands with a lot of people, very important people, politicians, lawmakers. This really deeply disturbed Ken Kratz. Ken Kratz wanted the limelight, and he tried to steal it from Stephen by painting Stephen to be this heartless monster who had committed this incredibly bad crime. I mean, when we think about it, if that victim is indeed Teresa Halbach, whatever happened to her or the victim in this case was horrendous. As I said to you before, shot at least twice in the skull, cut up, dismembered, cremated, and bones spread. And remember, think about 40 to 50% of the skeletal remains, no one knows where they are. They're gone. K9.
Well, first of all, I'm going to say that I don't believe that they proved to me that Teresa's dead. Second of all, I think that Cherie Cohane was asked, was the evidence tainted? And she admitted the fact that, yeah, she had some students in there that day and when they were doing whatever. And, oh, yeah, it's possible that she might have touched something.
Correct. Yeah,
and,
correct.
I mean, every aspect of this has been very, it's been very tedious, and we worked very, very hard to try to put this puzzle together. But there's one statement that sticks in my mind, and it was
Yes.
said to Stephen Avery, "I got you this time."
That was I think that was the sheriff. That was Kucerik. And we covered that in one of our earlier
Yep.
podcasts. Correct, it was the sheriff, Kucerik. Yeah, look, guys, I think we can see that this is much bigger than what we really think it is. A lot of effort and a lot of money has been spent in convicting Stephen Avery. And I believe it's all to do with the civil lawsuit. And it'd be great to get Travis's viewpoint on all of that, to see what he thinks about all of that. But it's rather remarkable that, and I still shake my head, right? Here's a man, Stephen Avery, who spent 18 years in prison. Yes, he ran his cousin off the road, and yes, he had to spend time in prison for that. There's no question about that. But the mere fact that he spent at least an additional 12 years in prison for something that he really didn't do, he professed his innocence. The whole trial, the whole Penny Bernstein event got whitewashed by Peg Logenschlager, who said that, hey, there's nothing wrong here, nothing to see here, guys, no blame. And in actual fact, Penny tried to blame the victim for picking out Stephen Avery, but we know that everything was geared in manipulating Penny to pick Stephen Avery, right? And this is despite the fact that really the police of the county knew all about the activity of Gregory Allen, right? He fitted the profile perfectly, but chose to look away. So Stephen Avery came up with a civil lawsuit with his lawyers, up to $36 million. He likely wasn't going to get anywhere near that, but I believe that it was, if they opened up a corruption probe to look at the sheriff, the DA, potentially a lot of nasty stuff could have come out, which could have been very, very damaging to a lot of people. And when one thinks about it, look at the timing of the events. The depositions were being done, they were being taken. The last two, I believe, were Kucerik and the DA. And in between that time, according to the state, Stephen Avery just happens to butcher a 25-year-old young woman, knowing the mere factor that everyone from Auto Trader knew that she had visited his property. It's mind-blowing.
Is there a doctor in the house?
I need one. Yes, take over somebody. I've just got a bad cough.
So did everybody get a chance to say their opinions?
I did.
I didn't.
Go
Okay,
for it.
then Neverland.
I
Never
did.
What was the question? Sorry.
The question is, do you think Teresa Halbach is alive or dead based on the forensic evidence that the state has?
Based on the forensic evidence, no, I don't believe they proved that she was dead. However, I personally believe she is.
Oh, that sounded like a piano, unfortunately. BB, do you have any comments?
Oh, no, sorry. It was just open. I forgot to close.
Okay.
Netflix
All right.
said no, based on the forensic evidence, they did not prove to her that Teresa was dead.
Right. Okay. Lily, do you have a comment?
Basically, you know what I was going to say, if I just take what they had there, to laugh at them going, excuse me? Where's the rest of the stuff? Yeah.
Yes.
They did not prove a thing.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So, guys, unless we have any more questions, I mean, we can always, of course, gather in Discord for additional comments and stuff like that. But because I am conscious of the time and we've nearly done 2 hours of what was meant to be just a short presentation. But I'd like to really thank everyone for joining us in the podcast. I hope that you've enjoyed it and learnt new things. I'm learning new things all of the time. And I would love to get Travis or anybody else who has a law background to really educate us about the case. I find it, I'm sure all of us will find it really fascinating. And yes, thank you for all the comments and for joining us. Do we have any final comments before we close the podcast?
I'm
BB.
good. I just want to tell everybody thanks for coming. Hope you have a nice weekend. And we'll be over in Discord if you guys want to come and meet us.
Awesome. Awesome. The other thing that I'd like to just point out is that we've done quite a lot of presentations looking at the forensic evidence, and you'll find that on our YouTube and also on our website, our Foul Play website. We have a lot of documentation there that you're quite welcome to have a look at. We've also done TTTs. I always find it very hard to say what they are, but we've actually done some presentations regarding item FL and other forensic evidence. I've done a series of interviews with Big Jeff talking about Cherie Culhane and the forensic evidence, and you're most welcome to have a listen to those. Jack, do you have a comment?
Just one more quick shameless plug for our crowdsourcing efforts to get the depositions and 2005 depositions and transcripts and videos. Any amount is okay. $1, $2, whatever. We don't care.
Awesome. And that's gonna open up another big can of worms. I spent some time, and Jax I think has as well, reading the 2010 interrogations from the Brendan Dassey post-conviction trial, and oh my God, if you want to find out all the wheelings and dealings with Ken Kratz, Kaczynski, and O'Kelly, they're definitely worth reading and going over. It's truly amazing what was happening behind the scenes. Excellent. All right, guys. Well, look, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Please come along if you enjoyed our podcast today. Please give a thumbs up. And if you have any comments, please write them down. We're not perfect. We do make mistakes, but we try and correct them. And remember, guys, we do have a team approach. I only know a little bit of aspects of this case. All my panelists and, of course, the listening audience, they've got a lot of knowledge and a lot of information. And hopefully together we can educate the wider public and keep this fire burning, because people need to know the injustices that have been done. Okay, guys, thank you so much, and we will catch you hopefully soon. I'm not quite sure whether it'll be next week or the week after for our regular Coffee with Foul Play podcast, but yeah, keep a watch. Thank you so much, guys.
This has been a Foul Play production.